to Keith to lead the discussions.
Okay, great. So, hi, my name's Keith Sheppard, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of the historical things and this thing called giving up the power, and I'll sort of get to that. I'm just going to share my screen so you can actually see. I have a little PowerPoint I'm going to be working with. Hopefully you can all see that. So, just a little bit of background. I arrived in the United States in 1983, and when I was 29 years old, and I had a lot of interest in the U.S. education system and how it was organized. And when I arrived here, I was sort of asking lots of questions. What's this thing called a softball? Why do you do it this way? Why do you do it that way? What I found was that nobody could ever tell me the answers to the questions I had. So why does America just teach in high school 1-year science courses? Where did that come from? And things like that. So, but nobody could ever answer. So, I've spent quite a bit of time actually finding out a lot of those things, and this talk sort of is based upon them. I have a series of questions. It's going to be a little quiz here. I'm going to ask you a little bit about the system in the United States and how it was set up and how it works and how that impacts the way people do things. I have the picture that's on the screen at the moment is a classroom in New York City in 1899. It's illustrating the old method of teaching. You can see the children at the back writing on the board. This was the normal way of doing things. And then it also has this modern giving up the power version. If you look at the front, you see the teacher, female of course, unmarried, is having one of the students actually do a demonstration. And this was considered to be the latest, in 1899, the latest cognitive event here, essentially. It was giving up the power. The students could actually do something. So that's kind of where that picture comes from. You'll notice the desks are all in rows, facing the front, etc. So it's really organized very, whatever. The experiment they're actually doing there is they've got a steam kettle full of water, and the boiling the water and then the condensing it, and talking about condensation and weather and things like that. So that's the thing behind it. I'm going to move on. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to be asking you a question, and I'd like you all to answer it. The first one I'm going to do generally for everybody, and then in the second and subsequent questions, you're going to be put into little rooms, and you can actually have a debate with each other about where these things come from. So the questions, what do you think the answer is to the question? Some of them are fairly straightforward. And then what I'm really interested in though, is finding out if you know anything about the implications of the answer to the question and how the education system was set up. So I'm going to start you out with a really simple one. So the question, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think about this. So my question is, so how many times is the word education in the US Constitution? Okay. Anybody like to jump in and give us an answer?
0.
0, correct. So this is the easy question on the quiz, because most people actually get this right. Most people get all the other questions wrong. So yeah, it is 0. The word, the word isn't in the Constitution. So big deal. But it has some very, very major implications for the United States education system, as it turns out. So again, I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to think about it. So what? The fact that it isn't in the Constitution, what does that mean? What actually happens as a result of that? I'll let you think for 30 seconds.
Feel free to enter your answers on the chat box, and I can always help to read those out as well.
That'd be good. That'd be good. Yeah.
Oh, good questions. So, does it appear on other countries' constitutions?
I will answer that one when we're doing the answer. Actually, that's a good question. Yes.
Good questions.
Okay. Any other questions there, Neil?
Oh, we've got lots here. So we've got
Just pick a sampler, because you know.
education is not a right. No resources need to be provided if you don't put it in the Constitution. No united policy, giving power to the states.
You got that. Okay,
No
so
obligation
you
for our
probably,
government to provide
hit as many as we need on that one. So I'm gonna cover what you're quite right. There's a lot of implications of this, and so does not include the word education. So this is the United States. I always like it as an Englishman having to get to say this is the United States. In fact, it's kind of misnamed in terms of education because it is not a United States at all. It's a completely disunited States. Each state has its own education system, essentially. So the United States is in fact 50 different countries as far as education is concerned. Very much like Europe is. You know, if you look at the European Union, you'd find lots of different countries. They all have their own educational system. The same happens here. So what's the important part of that? And some of the answers you were giving there actually do address these things. So I'll just go through a few obvious ones. Whoops. My light system is, if I don't move, it turns the lights off, so to save energy. So there is no common, you know, there's different, each state has different subjects that they actually teach. So for instance, New York is a good example. 70% of the students take a one-year course in high school in earth science, which doesn't really happen in many of the other countries. So each state has its own number of subjects it teaches. The graduation requirements vary considerably across the country from 2 to 4 sciences and what those sciences are. Teacher certification is completely different for each state. It's very difficult to actually, if you're a teacher, to move from one state to another without, it's a bit like getting a license in each of those. If you look at the praxis scores for the teachers, you'll find they vary considerably in what they'll accept as a passing score to be teaching. Some states have broad certification, others have narrow certifications. You can only get it in subject areas. Again, I'll give you the New York example. In New York, you need a master's degree to get professional license here. There are completely different standards. If you look at the evolution standards across the states, they are vastly different, as it turns out. So there are, you know, there's those sort of things. Somebody did mention the funding, and again, there's not very much federal funding that goes on. So again, I'll give you the New York numbers. 46% of the funding for education here comes from the state. 46% comes from the locales, the local school districts, and 8% comes from the federal government. That's presently. That kind of changes occasionally, but that means there are vast differences between the school districts in New York. So to give you an example, we're on Long Island. Long Island is a relatively wealthy area. We have school districts that are what I would consider to be very rich. Teachers have contracts with high-paying teachers. We have teachers here whose salaries are approaching $200,000 a year. So that you can see that if you go upstate, you'll find, you know, the salary might just touch $45,000. So you've got this wide disparity in all the funding that's going on. And because they're all individual states, and you probably never thought of this, but it means there's this whole industry that's grown up around this fact that you have to translate from one state to another. So schools, for instance, have guidance systems and administration. I mean, the United States system has way more administration and guidance than most of the European countries have. They really don't have guidance counselors and things like that. Getting into college is a whole industry on its own in terms of, you know, you get transcripts, they've got to be put in, you've got in some cases state exams, you've got these things called GPAs, you've got school profiles that need to be sent in. So it's this whole industry that's set up. So not having a federal system is, you know, it means there's a lot of ancillary work that actually goes on in terms of educational practice. And often it's very difficult to translate from one place to another. If you leave one state and go to another, it's quite difficult to do in some cases. Is that the same in other countries? No, most other countries, in fact, have a federal type of education system. So it's centralized, and you'll find it sort of uniformity across the country. Here you've got just this wide variety of things that go on. So has anybody any questions? So what I'm saying here is it's really quite important that you understand that, you know, not having the word education there, you know, sent the power essentially to the states. The states use them in their own sort of way. There's vast differences between the states in terms of education, and I'm sure most of you are sort of aware of that. So any comments, any questions on that before I set you your own little tasks? Okay, right, let me move on then.
I guess maybe I have a little reflection. I don't know, because I work in the US now, but I grew up in Canada.
Okay.
Which is very different. And then before I was working here, I was working in the UK.
All right.
Also really different.
Yes.
And I, you know, then being a human being living now in California, which is where I am, in Los Angeles County, where, you know, the public schools are absolute, they're awful.
Right.
And so then, yeah, you have also this public-private thing. I'm sorry I was slightly late, so I don't know if we've gotten into that yet. But I just think it's interesting for me. All the things that I have to think about now as an educator in the United States are not things that I ever had to think about or consider, either growing up in Canada as a child or when I was working in the UK. And I always find it really problematic that there's so much weird state control over things.
Right. So we're going to kind of get to a couple of those later on in this, you know. But you're right. So yeah, I mean, I was educated in England, and I did 6 years of physics in high school, for instance, in secondary schools, which, you know, you don't do that here. So there's so many differences that it leads to, and we're going to look at a couple of those there. But yeah, it did take me a long time to sort of figure out the system here. So let me go on to the next. I'm going to go on to the next question. So we're going to put you in groups, and there are two questions here. I'm going to get rid of that so I can read the question. So here's the first question. Why are US high school science courses 1 year in duration? So if you take physics, it's usually a 1 year course. If you take bio in high school, it's a 1 year course. And why are they taught in that order? Biochemistry, physics normally. So what we're going to do is we're going to put you into little breakout rooms. And what we'd like you to do is pick a person who can be your spokesperson. And we want you to come up with what you think the answers to those are, and what are the implications of it, where it came from, and why it actually happens. Okay. So Neil, you're going to get them in the
yeah, I'm going to thank you for that. I'm going to stick you into your groups starting from now.
And we're going to give you six minutes for this first one.
Cool. Keith, would you like to go into a room, or do you want to stay out of the rooms?
I'll stay out of them because it might bias what I'm thinking. So.
No worries.
It's yeah. I'm quite intrigued as to what they'll, you know, the biochem physics one, what they actually say. Will any of them actually figure out what it is? There isn't an answer really. There's no reason.
Don't give the answers away. All right, let's have a look. So I'm going to put the timer on for 5 minutes, and then that will give them then a 60-second window to sign out and come back into the room. Okay. We still have a couple of guests who are still here. Pamela, Abby, and Brenda. Did you need a room, or are you?
Yes, I would love a room. Thank you. Can you put me in a room? Thanks.
Yeah. So I think Brenda, you were in room 9. I think you can actually. I can move you there now. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I wasn't able to join it. Thank you.
In that case, let me see. It says it's not joined. Let me shift you to a different one. Add 2 to 8. There we go. And Abby, did you want to be put into a room? Or Pamela? They're there, but they're not there. So where was your favorite just place to have taught, and then Keith?
Oh, I loved Tanzania. It was great. It was a UN school. It was a UN school. It was fantastically resourced and had such a diversity. Like there was maybe 100 different nationalities there. So,
that's pretty cool.
And it was right on the Indian Ocean. Very nice school. So, and I was there I was doing an educational, 3 years. That was it. And I did like I did in New York City.
I think
learned so much there. Learned so much about how other people live.
Yeah, I think as you said, you only really get to know a country and the people once you've actually got immersed into it. And I've heard that from several of my friends who've taught in like Vietnam and India and the Philippines, and as they've said, it's a eye-opening experience to kind of go and kind of teach in a different country. As you said, kind of learn those differences.
Right.
Okay. I should be able to send a message to everybody, but somehow it's not working. Oh, here we go. Hi, Helen. Would you like to be put into a room?
Hello, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Let me assign you one. Assign to room 9. There you go.
Thank you.
Pamela, are you still with us? Did you want to be put into a room? Oh, your connection is okay. No worries at all. We can include you in the conversation here if you wish. My current computer is also going sketchy. I've got this fear that it will do what it was doing over the weekend, where it would just suddenly turn itself off for no apparent reason, and it just completely shuts down and restarts, which is fabulous. It's great when you're right in the middle of writing things. Okay, we've got 4 minutes in, so we can. I think in about. I'm going to send a message to everyone saying. Oh, yeah, no, I must admit, I'm looking forward to this weekend. I think it's going to be a good one. I'm hoping to do some actual writing and focus on some me time where I can actually read some papers and do some writing and stuff. Do you say you are you doing active in education research at the moment as well, Keith, or are you so fully booked with your directorship?
I do. I have a doctoral student defending in about 3 weeks. So.
Oh, okay.
We put out quite a few PhDs here.
Cool. What's their work going to be on?
So this guy's actually, interesting enough, he's looking at the development of bio as a subject. So how biology became a subject altogether from the botany, zoology, stroke physiology aspects, and it turns out to be quite interesting. It doesn't sound it off the top of my head, but it is actually quite interesting. So it actually has a creation. 1906, bio starts to exist, and prior to that it didn't. And then it takes over. So it's now the predominant science here.
That is cool. That is cool. Just realized that I should probably pause the recording as everyone's going into their breakout rooms. But no, we'll do that next time. Welcome back, everyone. We've got 8 of you. Everyone else is still avidly discussing things, so I shall. We'll hold on for a second. It's always nice when people take a long time to come back. You know that the conversations are going on quite well. And we've got 10 seconds before they just get automatically booted out. So we've got about 7. Awesome.
My God, it just occurred to me. Please tell me it's not in that order because that's alphabetical order.
I'm glad you said that.
I hadn't even
I'm glad you
thought
said
of that until we came back and I.
right. That's a common answer, by the way. I'm just going to point out. I'll kind of go through these things. So, ready to go?
I hadn't thought of it until now. Then I
Right.
had a moment of horror.
Right. So why are US high schools 1-year courses? I mean, I just put it in context. That does not happen in any other country. Like if you go to Europe, they're all multiple year courses. In a sense, a lot of the other countries actually teach them very much like languages are taught. You have French 1, French 2, French 3, maybe AP French. Same with same with the sciences. You have Bio 1, 2, 3. You take more advanced bio. So you can take 5 years of biology, 6 years of biology in secondary school, 6 years of chemistry, 6 years of physics in other countries. So America is the only place, really. Liberia does as well now. That actually does it in that sort of sense. So where does it come from? So can we have some volunteers to give us the answers that they think?
We've got one in the chat box if no one wants to speak up.
Yeah, actually, it's probably easiest if you put them in the chat box and I can kind of talk about them anyway. So
We've got the Committee of 10 from 1892, the first one.
Good. I have an article on the Committee of 10, and the answer is actually not. But the Committee of 10 is part of the reason that it starts to do that sort of stuff. It's not the actual cause of it.
Increasing need for maths from Elizabeth.
Increasing need for what? Math?
Math.
Yeah, no, that's nothing. That's really...
Physics needs more math than biology.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's the answer to the second one, and that is, yeah. I mean, that is a widely held belief. So, but it isn't exactly what goes on, as it turns out.
Oh wow, we've got lots of really great answers here in the chat box. I read a couple. Farming schedules is one.
That kind of makes its way into it, but again, it isn't the final answer.
Order is based on increasing body of knowledge. Bio had a larger body of knowledge in the 1800s, and then it increased.
Right, that's not that's sort of true, but that's not the real answer behind it, as it turns out. So I'm going to just give you a quick answer to the first question. So why are they 1-year courses? It's really down to geography. The United States is a very large country, and most of its schools. So I'm going to give the example of 1900. The average school size in 1900 was 50 students. So the little red schoolhouse type of things. Now, population density concentrations are much greater in other schools. So when the schools were being set up, that's the average school size, 50. And most schools then would have between 2 and 3 teachers. One of them would be the principal, who probably dealt with the Latin, etc. So you had that going on. So it's large. The schools are very, very small. I'll just give you a reading of, very briefly, all the science courses that were taught in most schools in the 1890s. So you've got botany, zoology, chemistry, physics, geology, physiology, astronomy, and physical geography were the science courses that were offered. Many schools offered all of those courses. So, and if you looked at the other things, and you'll see this in one of the later slides, there were lots of courses in Latin, there were lots of courses in languages, etc. So these 2 to 3 teachers might have in any 1 year 6 subjects each to teach. So they'd have 6 preparations for these. So it was just not possible to actually give, one-year courses in everything. So the courses originally were very short. They were short courses. They were usually between 10 and 14 weeks. There's a whole set of books in the 19th century called 14 Weeks in Physics, 14 weeks in Natural Philosophy, 14 weeks in Geography. So that actually was the way that those things. So they were really short courses. As it sort of developed then, what happened was that standardization came in after the Committee of 10 and the Committee on College Entrance Requirements around the 1900s, and we're going to deal with this in one of the later questions. Then they became one-year courses. So there is actually a creation of one-year courses in the early 1900s. And there were so many subjects going on, they could only do it that way. They could only have one-year courses just to do that. So it's really down to the geography of the country. In other places, and that kind of started to change though when urbanization sort of came in and large schools started to exist. So, but early on when these were one-room schoolhouses. So that's fundamentally why you got them originally, because of the geography. So going to the next one. The next one's quite interesting. I'm going to share with you. We asked this question. I go into schools and I ask this question of why do you do it this way? Why is it biochem physics? In some states, there is earth science in there. So in New York, for instance, it goes bio, earth science, chemistry, physics. But most places, it's just biochem physics. So we asked the principals of the schools, why is it done that way? And somebody has already asked me the question. There are some sort of typical answers. The first one is many of the principals say it's alphabetic. That's it. Biochem physics. It doesn't really matter which order you teach them in. So let's do them up in that order. A lot of them just say, well, there's no reason, it's just random. A lot of them say, hey, it's the Committee of 10 decided that. It wasn't. There's an argument, well, the physics is hard, it needs more advanced math. And that again doesn't actually turn out to be the right answer. So when they set up the physics courses originally, the only math you really needed was a bit of trig and a bit of algebra. So that wasn't actually the case. If I set lights back on. And a lot of them just say no idea. So they're the typical answers that everybody gives. So just a couple of things there. This isn't the order that was happening in the 19th century. I mean, biology didn't exist. There was no biology course. It doesn't get created until the early in New York in 1906. The first Regents exam is given in biology as a subject in 1906. So biology isn't even in the mix. There are botany, zoology, and physiology courses, but no bio. So that's the reason for it. If you went back to 1900, physics was the predominant course. Kids would all, be taking physics if possible, and that was taken before chemistry usually. So this order came about much later in the 1920s, when after bio had been created, it pushed its way into the early part of the curriculum. We're going to look again at why that happened, and then the physicists essentially wanted their course to be closest to college, and they sort of slowly moved from being the early science to being the late science. So that's kind of where it came from. Bio, when it was written to be introduced into the curriculums, it was actually written for 9th grade, and that's why it was put in there. What the chemists and the physicists didn't realize was with an elective system, they weren't getting elected after a while. So that's actually where it comes from. But it is an identifying feature of the United States science education system that you have this order of different courses. Any questions?
Yeah, Keith, there was one question from Carrie here asking, why are there so many common courses in the European school system?
I'm not sure I fully understand that one.
Sorry. So you mentioned, this is Carrie, hi. There were so many courses, like science courses in the US system. Right. Were there that many different science courses in the European system? So
not initially. They did have those type of things, but you could take them over, again, you could take them over multiple years. So the big difference is you had to select. So if you're in the European system, you are early on in your career not taking certain subjects, you stop taking. You can't possibly take all the different courses. So, okay. So as a typical example, the equivalent of the 11th grade and 12th grade in England, for instance, you would only be taking 3 courses. So I took physics, chemistry, and math. That was the only 3 things I was taking in 11th and 12th grade. No English, I'd graduated, I'd matriculated in that. No language, that was it. It was just those 3 things. And you were kind of majoring in them. So that is one of the sort of, so there is around the early 1900s, there's this change in what actually went on. So that's kind of where it comes from. And yeah. So yeah, there's more options here, I believe, than there are there. Any other questions, Neil?
No, I think we're good.
Right, let me move on because we have quite a lot of questions, and hopefully we'll get to those. Whoops. Go. Right. So I'm just going to. So all those things were. This again. I'm just showing you the map of the states. All those things were occurring, and they occurred differently in different places, as it actually turns out. So what I'm going to do in the next slide is to show you some of the, and this is the giving up the power sort of thing, is how did you possibly, if you were a teacher and you had 6 preps, teach all those subjects? How did you teach astronomy, for instance, when you may never have taken an astronomy class? Any ideas? And this is still sort of prevalent in some sort of system still.
We've got textbooks, wing it, and
textbooks, wing it. You've got it. You nailed it there. So, and I'm just going to show you an example of. So, if you suddenly arrive at the school the next day, you've been assigned to teach astronomy, and you don't know anything about astronomy. Don't worry, the textbooks will save you because they're written for recitation purposes. And so, I'm going to give you a quick lesson in astronomy here and learning. And okay, here's an astronomy textbook. All right, so we're going to do, all of us are going to do this together. I'm the teacher, so I'm going to do the question. You're the student, and so you're going to recite the answer. Okay, you ready for question 1, lesson 1? What is the body called upon which we live? And you will all say,
It is called
the Earth,
or
world.
Congratulations, you have learned that. So yes, it's recitation. This is how it was taught. This is a textbook. This is a textbook. It's called recitation, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea of recitation. So I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit because we're not going to get to all our questions here. The idea here, and you'll see this come around quite a lot, is that one lesson in school required you to go outside of school and spend twice as much time memorizing it. And this was a measure of you having learned it, your ability to memorize this. It was kind of a mental discipline type of thing. Your brain is a muscle, you can exercise it, and this is a good way of exercising the muscle. And of course, Latin was the best subject for exercising the brain, as it turned out. So yeah, this is how you did it. So the teacher didn't need to know anything. They would assign lesson 1, and then they'd come in the next day and they'd ask the questions, and people would be individually or group-wise asked to do that. And this is recitation. So the recitation, that's where the 3 credit system comes from, is this type of thing. So you get 3 credits for a course normally, and it's because you need to spend 1 unit of time in the school or college doing this, and 2 units outside, hence the 3 credits. That's where it actually derives from, the recitation things. And you will in fact see later on that the lab work gets gypped from this sort of perspective. But that's how you would do this. So a lot of the things that were on were just memorized. You didn't have to do anything. I think, unfortunately, you still find quite a little bit of that thinking in some of the science teachers, where we get them where they're actually, they have students memorize all these definitions, etc. So that's a kind of really old practice, mental discipline sort of practice, rather than a sort of thinking strategy. So, any sort of follow-up questions on that one? Okay, let's move on. I just wanted to show you this. This is the go.
Siobhan, did you want to read out your question?
I don't really know if it was a question. It's sort of more a comment. I think it's really interesting how this legacy of sort of recitation is still continuing, right, in the way that the way
Yes.
that there's a lot of teaching now. It's just that you don't repeat it right away necessarily. It's just
Right.
you need to repeat it to me 3 months down the line or something.
And if you look at the tests from this time, they're just like describe, define. It's all that. It's all just memorize, etc., etc. Yeah, and it kind of made its way into the books, and yeah, people still use this type of approach, which is, not very. It's not giving up the power. It's just sort of, pushing them in. And of course, corporal punishment was allowable this time. So if you hadn't memorized it, you often could get beaten. So it's a really powerful motivator there.
If it's okay, I would maybe ask
Sure.
one thing that follows on from that, which is, and I don't know if we're going to get to it or not, but the sort of influence of sort of industrialization
Yes.
on the way that we were educating people, right? Because you want to educate workers, not necessarily thinkers.
I'm kind of going to get to that, hopefully, with a slight different view on it. But yeah, we do look at, industrialization is a very important thing. It's industrialization and urbanization turned out to be really quite important because the schools grow in size when you do that. And then you can have departments and you can have teachers who actually only teach one subject. Where we think that's normal now. Teachers teaching out of field was just common. Everybody did it back then. So you had to know a lot. You had to be flexible, but you were being asked to teach things you didn't know anything about. So, but I'm just gonna because we are running out a little bit of time here. So here's the entrance requirements for New York colleges in 1880. It's really quite interesting. Look how many grammar Latins there are. Latin grammar, Latin prose, Latin Caesar, Cicero, Virgil, Sallust, Greek grammar. This was the entrance requirements for New York colleges in 1880. You might notice something missing from the list. Anybody notice what's missing?
No science.
No science. You didn't have to have any science. Science wasn't a college entrance requirement in 1880. It didn't matter. So but they did want you to have Latin for some unknown reason. And this shows you, again, the PowerPoint, I'll make it available for you. This does show you all the different colleges, like College A is Columbia. This is what their entrance requirements were in 1880. No science whatsoever. So next one. This is going to be in a breakout room. This guy is the father of seat time. So my questions are, who is he? And why are many of you going to be very happy with what he did? That's kind of an obtuse question. And what does he have to do with the present day high school and college courses? So I'm going to put you in your breakout rooms. You just got 5 minutes this time to discuss this one. And then I think you'll be quite surprised by the answer to this one, as it turns out. Okay, Neil, are you going to put them in the rooms?
They're all in the room, so you can go for it. With 5 minutes.
Right. So they're all in the rooms now. They're not, so I can talk freely without giving them the answers.
The one question came out, which is what is seat time from Elizabeth?
I'm going to demonstrate that.
Awesome. Okay. Oh yeah, Anne is saying college was for kids going into clergy positions.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true early on. And into
position, and then the last people are going to be kicked back out. Awesome. Cool. We've got everyone back in.
Okay. So, did anybody get who this is? Wow.
Carnegie.
It is Carnegie. I call it Carnegie. Neil calls it Carnegie. And I know in America it's Carnegie, but yeah, that's the guy. This is Carnegie, yes. And so why are many college professors very happy with what he did?
Tenure? Did he do tenure?
Nope. Something much better.
Credit system, credit hours for classes.
He does that, that's for sure. He does. He's in charge of the credit hours, but that has an impact on the college professors. That's what I'm asking. Why they're very happy. Okay, so let me tell you. So Carnegie sets up what is called the Carnegie system, the Carnegie unit. And I'm going to kind of explain that in a minute. But so the basic rule was he wanted to standardize education. He wanted to industrialize education because he saw the powers of that in what he did in his steel things, and he wanted to sort of organize the educational system along those lines. And he knew that if he put money into it, then that would happen. So he was very, very smart in this one. So what he did was he gave $10 million to set up a pension fund for college professors. Anybody know what it's called? It's called TIA-CREF. It's probably your pension fund. So Carnegie is the guy that sets them up to do the college fund. And the Carnegie unit that's set up as a result of this, and I'll explain how that happens, is still the unit of academic credit you get in high school. If you take a course in physics, you get an academic credit, which is a Carnegie unit. It's called a Carnegie unit. It's actually, it was never really named that. They just know it as the Carnegie unit. So just a couple of things. So how did you get into the system? How did you do that? Most colleges, if you looked around, he does this, by the way, in 1905. Most colleges in like 1900, if you were a professor, you just stayed on. There was no pension, so you just stayed on. And the kind of joke was that, you know, they carried you out in a box, and that was one of you had to die on the thing because you had no pension. So he knew he was going to be impacting the system by giving college things, but he had strict rules on how you could get this money. So the 10 million he gave in 1905 was for regular colleges. In 1910, he gave another 10 million, and he included state schools. Thank you, Andrew. And he also included some of the Canadian schools as well, so Canadian colleges. So, but the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which is what he set up, had rules on what was a college, right? So they rules for the Carnegie Foundation said fundamentally, to be a college, you have to have at least 6 full-time professors. You've got to have a 4-year course of study. This will all be familiar with you because this is what happens at the moment. And you've got to only admit students who've had 4 years of high school. Prior to that, you could start college when you were 14. You could start any age you wanted, so it didn't really matter. And he also went on to define what a high school was. So a high school had to have a 4-year course of study. And it had to have at least 4 subjects per year. That's increased dramatically, as you're probably all aware. And he invents this idea called seat time. Well, he doesn't invent it, he sort of defines it essentially. He says a course is 120 hours sitting in your seat. It's called seat time. So to get a credit, you have to be in class 120 hours. Now, let me translate that. It's basically 180 days for a school and 1 lesson a day. That's 120 hours. And the Carnegie Foundation were very earnest in saying, and it isn't what you learn when you're in the class, it's how much time you spend in it. So that's how the Carnegie unit was actually defined. So yeah, that's it. You get credit in the United States for sitting in your seat for 120 hours. And the college professors got their pension scheme. All the colleges bought into the scheme because he was essentially giving you a pension fund, and it had a massive impact on what went on in the schools, as it actually turns out. So he put forward this proposal in 1905. In 1909, it had been almost universally accepted, and people were taking money from it. It does become TIA-CREF, and it's actually your pension fund. So that's quite an interesting little story. I have a couple of little demos I'm going to do. I'm just going to stop the sharing. I'm going to move over and do a couple of little demos and see why that's an important thing. Right? Hopefully I can get the full screen here. So hope you can see this. Right, yeah, okay. Let me just check I've got it on the right. I hope you can see that. This is one of the issues with the Carnegie unit, and the fact you've got this thing. These are chemistry books over time. So this is an 1834 chemistry book. You'll notice it's very small, thin, fragile. This is 1834. This is a 1905 chemistry book, and you'll notice a difference between the two. This one is bigger. It's bigger in every dimension. It's fatter, it's longer, and it's that way. Then we get to 1945. It's bigger again. Again, in every dimension, it's bigger and bigger and bigger. Now we get to 2000. Well, yet again, another increase. So it's bigger and bigger. So this is what happened to chemistry over the years. It got more and more stuff put in. A lot of this is due to the fact that chemistry developed as a subject, but the 120 hours didn't change. It's still the same. So in 1905, you had to do 120 hours. In 2021, you still have to do the same thing. It's 120 hours to get your credit. So despite the fact the thing has grown and grown and grown and grown, it hasn't changed. So I have another little demo I want to illustrate that with. Okay, hopefully you'll be able to see this. Right, so what I've got here for this demo, I'm going to do this for physics, right? So here is 1905 curriculum. This is 120 hours. This is a Carnegie unit in 1905. Okay, and here I have the physics course in 1905. And you're going to notice that the physics course fits into the time allocated to it. Okay, that's very nice. But what happens in physics after 1905? Well, there's this thing called modern physics that gets added to the curriculum. So where's it go? Well, I know. Let's put it into the curricular time. What's going to happen? Okay, I've got something on the thing. It doesn't fit. Okay, so this is the problem you've got. You defined the curricular time as 120 hours, and then you've added more and more stuff. The chemistry has almost doubled in volume over the last 110 years. That's not all that happens. Let's bring in some administrative things that we have to now add to the mix as well. And you'll notice it doesn't actually fit. But we still keep pouring. We still keep pouring more and more in. So it's a one-year course, and it's 120 hours, and I keep adding stuff to it, and it gets really difficult to actually learn this amount of material in the time that's been allocated for it. So there we go. It's a mess. So this is just a simple demonstration of some of the things that added. We haven't actually changed the curricular time at all. It's still a 1905 level, gives you the one Carnegie unit. So, and I had this as a question later on, why is lab work given different amounts of credit than lecture or recitation? And it's for this very reason. They said, oh, we'll count labs as half the value. So that's actually what they did. They said, to fit it in so you can get 6 periods a week, hey, we'll count the labs at half the actual recitation value. And that's what they did. And it's still done today. So you actually look at most colleges, they've got labs that are longer, but have less credit. Notice the credit system is based upon time, 120 hours. So you should, if you do 120 hours in the lab, you should get more. You all probably went through science degrees where you spent more time in class getting the same credit as every other subject area. So it's a little, so in New York now, it's 7 periods a week for 1 credit in science. It's only 5 periods a week for a credit in language, English, history, math, etc. So that's just a little simple demonstration of one of the issues. So getting back to giving up the power, this is part of the problem here. You've got too much curricular material for the time allocated to it. So what's a solution? Anybody think of a solution?
Add more cups.
Add more cups. Excellent, excellent. So AP Physics figured that out eventually 5 years ago. And they said, physics is now going to be a 2-year course. So guess what? Yes, it fits. How do you think the schools reacted? They just teach the first year. They don't actually. So if you look at AP Physics 1, the first year of the course, and AP Physics 2, 95% of the people take AP 1 and don't take AP 2. So they still like their old system. The APs, when they were developed to be one-year courses, even though all the European equivalents and all the equivalents everywhere else in the world, like the French BAC, the International Baccalaureate, the English A-levels, are all two-year courses. The American one is a one-year course, and you've got the same thing. Students have to, in 1 year, get through that. This has more foreign language in it than a foreign language course to them. So that's just a nice little demo, I think, of one of the issues. We have got too much content in there that it's not possible to learn in the time allocated to it. So that needs to be dealt with at some point. They've got to have some sort of reform that actually deals with that underlying issue of you haven't got enough time. We keep adding stuff and we don't actually take stuff out. So it doesn't fit. Okay, I'm gonna move back to the little slideshow. Anybody, any comments, questions on that? It's kind of interesting, I think.
There are a bunch of comments on the chat box. We are actually at the 1 hour mark, so I don't know how long people want to hang out, but I know Keith has got a bunch more questions and lots of really good insight to keep on sharing. So would you mind hanging on for a bit more, Keith?
Sure, I am.
Cool, he's ready to keep on going. So on the questions, there was definitely lots of really good feedback here for your information, and as Catherine was saying, she said that information is Googleable now. Knowledge is how we construct that information. Focusing on how to learn on your own and construct the knowledge might be a way forward to kind of change that kind of platform, right?
Right.
You invest more on kind of.
That's a very good point. And one of the big issues with the Carnegie unit is the fact that it doesn't fit very well with online learning. You know, it's where it's this set, you get credit for a set amount of time, but you know, you're working on your own. How do you assign credit to an online course when it's based upon time? That's it. So it definitely needs to. I mean, I came up with the idea of maybe it's time to change the Carnegie unit to a Buffett Gates unit, and Buffett Gates would give the money. You know, they could give them, you know, like, you know, 5 billion or so, and to get the money, you'd have to buy into their system, and their system would not give you credit for the amount of time you sat in a chair, but it will give you credit for what you learned when you were sitting in the chair. So that might be a good way of doing it. And Carnegie, as somebody asked the question about the industrialization thing, he knew very well that this would change, you know, that money makes things happen in education. And that's why he did it. It was very successful. The Carnegie unit took over within 5 years. So there any other? So this kind of goes out. So it was established in 1905. He gave 10 million. He actually gave another 10 million later on. It's called the Carnegie Unit. It's 120 hours of things. In fact, they define the hour as 55 minutes, as it turns out, interestingly enough. And it's, you know, that's it. It's based upon that. It's based upon how much time you spend in it. And it's what we call the coin of the realm. You know, I spend most of my time dealing with the Carnegie Unit in certain ways. Like, so I get students coming along. As a non-American, it was interesting that students would come and ask you for extra credit. And it's just, that's a completely alien concept to non-Americans. I mean, you pass the exams or you don't pass the exams is basically how it's done. And this was universally adopted in 1910 because it was just so successful with the money. And the problem with it is it's fixed the courses in place. We are basically still using the data from the 1905 creation of the Carnegie. It's problematic for the double period stuff. It doesn't fit, and you get this ridiculous split of time for lecture and lab, as if they were somehow different. So.
Indeed, there are a ton of comments and some really active conversations in the chat box.
Let's go.
So let me see if we can get a couple of these. Does anybody want to speak up about some of these questions, or do you want me to go ahead and try and read some? Anyone brave enough?
Come on.
I think we're trying to respect the order that thoughts were shared on the chat.
Right. I'm trying to get back to the start of it. There's so many things speaking.
Excellent. I like it. Of course, I've committed the same crime here. I put too many questions in the time allocated to me. So,
in the nature of it all. I think the general trend seems to be kind of people are saying kind of that, you know, they would much rather we kind of try and flip the classroom or take it away from the emphasis of facts. And as you said, find a way to give up that power from just like sitting down and actually teaching people to facts and kind of focus more on kind of how to actually think and utilize information.
Agreed. So it is based upon the old mental discipline model of education, and I agree completely that, you know, active learning and things like that. You know, we can change this system. It doesn't have to be done.
I think that one of the common trends seems to be here that, you know, there's, while that's all the case, there's still the whole language and vocabulary issues of being able to teach them how to actually talk about the concepts without kind of and I think that's the hard part there, is how do you actually kind of instill that information to them too.
Right. Well, it's much easier if you can do it over a longer period of time. That's for sure.
And Frank, at the end,
because most places have like conceptual classes followed by like a standard college preparatory one and then more advanced sort of things. Most people do that.
So I'm going to skip to the end. There's a couple here that are pertinent, but there's lots of really good conversation. Brittany was just saying she just read a paper and it's history of grading, and teachers teaching more by grading less or differently. I think that sounds like it's a pretty interesting one. Brittany, did you want to expand on that if you're still here?
Sure. It turns out like the grading system just came about so that so that colleges will all be at the same standard, and so they assigned grades, but that wasn't until the late 1800s. Yeah. Before then, you would get like a medal for being the top of your class, but that was pretty much it. So you just sitting through this classwork, pretty much told future people that when you graduated, oh, you went through this coursework. But now we've started creating this grading scheme, and then it went in and talked about how Brown they don't put Fs on the transcripts. Right. They just show up, if you fail the class, it just does not show up. And I thought that was fascinating. Right. But that the whole grading aspect, the A, B, C, D, E, and F, started about the turn of the century of the 1800s to 1900s. And it was more of a communication between the education other professors to be like, oh, well, this student was the top of their class and this student was in the bottom.
Right. So one of the things I do talk about, but not in this one because I have too much to do with this, is the grading scheme itself. So who decided 65 was the pass mark? Where did that come from? And is it the same in other countries? No, it's not. 65 would be a good grade in England, for instance, in a college course. And here it would be a fail. So yeah, and there's like, how comes there are, you know, A plus A, A minus, B plus B, B minus, C plus C, C minus, D, that's 10 grades to pass, and then no E and an F. I mean, where did that come from? I mean, it's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense, though it does historically.
Well, one of the things they brought up is that now the students anticipate a certain grade and they don't care so much about the learning aspect, whereas before you went to college and you learned, but you didn't really always receive a grade in the 1800s. Right. And then now we start assigning grades and students just say, well, I want my A, and they don't care about what they're learning to get that A anymore.
So just as a little shocker here, so I didn't graduate high school because you don't graduate high school in England. I didn't have a GPA. I didn't have a transcript, which was a bit of a problem when I moved over here because I had to have a transcript. I didn't go to the prom because there wasn't a prom. So things are, you know, like things are, you know, completely different in different things. To get into college in England when I was growing up, you had to pass the tests. You had to pass the nationally, you know, standardized tests. If you did, you went to college. If you did, it was free. That was great. I mean, but it is often very differently. Coming over here to do my graduate work, it was a bit of a chore. I had to get somebody to take what I'd done in my undergraduate college and translate it into America. So I had to get a GPA, and it was very. So there's a business around doing that, as it turns out, if you're bringing in qualifications. So the pass mark in the college, in the universities in England was 40%, not 65%. Newton would have failed if he was using the American grading system, as it turns out, because he even though he won the prize there, he wasn't scoring 70 in his tests and things like that. So it's a different way of doing it, and I think some people have alluded to this. Yeah, maybe it's time to have a look at, or do we need to do it this way? I think COVID has been quite interested in like a lot of online stuff. As I found some of it to be, wow, this is a better way of doing certain things. So, but that needs a change of the system and reforms that actually do change